final speaker of the symposium, Srimati Aryamba Sriramji. This is again a book review only. She is going to critically review the book Many Rāmāyaṇas edited by Paula Richman. I was speaking about this book specifically this morning in my introduction, in my welcome address. So the grand finale of the symposium coming from this review is very fitting also. So wonderful, Aryambaji. Please go ahead.
Namaste. Thank you for the opportunity, first of all. So at the outset, we will be reviewing a book titled Many Rāmāyaṇas. And while the Ramayana itself does not need an introduction, the author of this book, Paula Richman, will certainly need an introduction. Paula Richman, as we know, was born on the 21st of August in 1945 in Ventura County in California. So she became a scholar in Tamil, South Asian languages, literature, and also religion. While she's best known for her work in vernacular traditions and oral narratives, she is particularly known for her work in Ramayana. She is an emerita William H. Danford Professor of South Asian Religions at Oberlin College in Ohio right now. The work that brought her to the limelight is the one that is in discussion today, titled Many Rāmāyaṇas. The book was published by the California Press for the very first time in August 1991. The cover of the book is very interesting. It carries Paula Richman's name not as the author, but as the editor. Now, before we dive into the book itself, we must know that this book is known for its academic rigor, and it was the first of its kind when it came out. The book, as suggested by the author, is a compendium of essays on the Ramayana. It is divided into thematic sections, such as literally retellings from the Ramayana itself. Some other are reinterpretations of the Ramayana. They have mentioned regional adaptations, and then there is a whole listing of various performance traditions connected to the Ramayana. Now, these thematic clusters are not merely organizational conveniences, but they are the signal that this anthology faces a core argument. The argument is that the Ramayana is not a monolithic text, but a living, shape-shifting narrative with profound local and global implications. Now, through the contributions of several scholars across disciplines, the book foregrounds methodological plurality. We say so because there is a compendium of several essays, and therefore, the essays that deplore diverse lenses such as structuralist analysis, feminist critiquing, ethnography, and also post-colonial theory. It therefore brings an interdisciplinary scholarship, and the anthology invites readers not to consider what the Ramayana says, but to also consider who tells it and what is told at the end. Now, there is curatorial intent in this, and there is excessive scholarly framing. But we must understand that the book does not simply collect essays. It curates them with a keen eye for representing culture, linguistic, and ideological diversity of the Ramayana tellings across the south of India and Southeast Asia. Now, there is great engagement with regional texts and languages. The anthology showcases scholarly engagement with vernacular and classical languages like Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Sanskrit, Hindi, rather than relying on the English translations alone, which is a great thing because when we read the book, we get an essence of the language itself. Many contributors are themselves trained in regional philosophy and philology, and Richmond contextualizes these voices very thoughtfully. There's also excessive ethnical scholarship and citation practice in the book that we can see. Now, before we go into the book itself, we must understand that the main contributors are A.K. Ramanujam, Paula Richman's own contributions, there's Stuart Blackburn and Velucheri Narayana Rao, and also there's David Schulman. The book Many Rāmāyaṇas by Paula Richman is highly influenced by A.K. Ramanuja's essay called 300 Ramayana. Now, 300 Ramayanas is a literary study in anthropology and folklore. For those who want to understand where Paula Richman comes from, her thought process and her ideologies, it is excessively important to understand what A.K. Ramanujam says in his 300 Ramayanas. So he, for the very first time, very thoughtfully publishes an article which later on became extremely debatable, but he publishes an article where he lists down the various Ramayana traditions that are alive in and around India. For paucity of time, we're not getting into most of them, but we do know that Richman's work, without breezing, Richman's work is literally acknowledging this essay as the influential point for her to write the book. Now, the core argument is that there is no single authoritative Ramayana, and many tellings across the languages, regions, castes, and religious traditions are originals of their own accord. Ramayana is not a fixed text, but a network of narratives shaped by cultural context and audience. Now, there are key examples that they mainly focus on, like Valmiki's Ramayana, Kamban's Ramayanam, the Jain Ramayana, Thai Ramakin, and some other South Asian folk tellings. To quote from the book, these scholars were pioneers in demonstrating that much like the nation itself, our nation, India, the Ramayana tradition embodies unity in diversity. Far from being a vernacular, singular, monolithic epic, the Ramayana exists as a constellation of narratives, such as a sprout inspired by Valmiki's foundation, Sanskrit, yet shaped by the regional, linguistic, devotional, and ideological differences. Together, these tellings affirm not only the epic's cultural resonance, but also its capacity for reinvention and relevance across time and traditions. Now, in many Ramayanas, Paula Richman includes references to several indigenous Ramayana traditions from across South Asia and beyond. She includes South India and Dravidian traditions like Kamban's Iramavataram, Kannada folk performances, Telugu Ramayanas, Jain Ramayanas from the Western and Central Indian traditions, the Bhils and the Gonds as they celebrate Ramayana, North Indian vernaculars, Tulsidas's Ramcharitamanas in Awadhi, Ramalila performances in Ramnagar in Uttar Pradesh, and parts around that, East and Northeast traditions like the Assamese Ramayana, and very interesting Santal and Munda communities, which are oral versions of the Ramayana. There are also Southeast Asian adaptations like the Thai Ramakin, Indonesian Wayang Kulit, which is a shadow puppetry tradition. So she lists down several traditions in and around South Asia. So this seems to be too good, right? So what is the problem? The problem is the tone that the book takes, primarily. Now we must ask ourselves, who speaks for the Ramayana? Who can be the voice for Ramayana? While Richman curates the book very methodically, she stands outside the point of view of Dharma, and therefore there is an outsider's framing of the Ramayana. As an American academic, she approaches Ramayana from a secular, anthropological, and literary framework rather than from within the Dharmic worldview. Now, why is it important? We will see in a little bit. But overemphasis on subversive and dissenting variants is also something that we repeatedly see in the book. The anthology foregrounds alternative tellings like the Jain, Tamil folk, Dalit, and feminist version, often at the expense of devotional, orthodox, and Shastric interpretations. While these versions are important for showcasing narrative diversity, their prominence can misrepresent the tradition's center of gravity, one would think. Now, readers may come away thinking that the Valmiki's Ramayana is not uh, equally weighted as compared to the other narratives, rather than Valmiki's Ramayana being the foundational seed text. There is also a great neglect of the bhakti core that is present in the Ramayana and a lack of indigenous scholarship. Because I say so because though there is extreme scholarship from different areas of the Western world, there is a lack of a voice from the inner indigenous scholars. And there is epistemic relativism, where the anthology reflects a postmodern ethos that values fragmentation and relativism over coherence and hierarchy of meaning. While this supports pluralism, it can undermine the sacred authority and philosophy of traditional readings. Now, there's also a cultural ramification in Indian context. What does this mean? When taught in Indian classrooms without sufficient grounding in primary text or lived traditions, the anthology can sow cultural confusion among students, and it can also breed cynicism towards inherent or inherited narratives. Lest we forget, rasa or emotion is at the epicenter of Indic traditions. When we detach this element from our works, it is the fracturing of that work. Now, it is as if uh, a movie critic, for example, after watching a romantic film, if he claims that there is no concept of love, would that make sense? It felt like that when I read the book. While Richman, under the influence of the works like that of A.K. Ramanujam, argues that Valmiki's version of the Ramayana, though documented to be the oldest or the first version, isn't necessarily the only original work. But every regional retelling is worthy of being an original. I am but to wonder if we could call an English movie, which was remade into an Indian regional language, would we call it the original? For example, take a movie like Chachi Char Subis or Avai Shanmugi as called in Tamil. This is a remake of Mrs. Doubtfire from English. But could we ever call Chachi Char Subis or Avai Shanmugi the original? It was and it will remain a readaptation or a retelling of the original, which is Mrs. Doubtfire. Now, many of us may recognize this. This was the Ramayana as telecasted in the Doordarshan in the early 90s. Now, the book that Paula Richman edits, called Many Rāmāyaṇas, opens with the open criticism on the influence of the Doordarshan's version of the Ramayana, because she wonders if the Doordarshan's version, which is solely based on Valmiki's Ramayana, whether it would be an overpower on the emphasis of Valmiki's Ramayana on the nation. Now, Philip Ludgendorff, who is one of the co-authors, understands, and he seems to suggest that the telecasting of the Ramayana was the first time that the story reached the Indian folk in a mass kind. Its popularity is evidence that people were drawn to the familiarity of the story, if not its empowering nature. A sense of liberating freedom dawned from the inspiration to lead a moral life that the story instilled. Now, the Rama story seems to have traveled along three routes. According to Santosh Desai, it is said to have traveled by land to the northern routes and took the story from the Punjab and Kashmir into China, Tibet, and East Turkestan. By sea, it traveled to the southern route and carried the story from Gujarat and South India into Java, Sumatra, and Malaya. And again by land, the eastern route delivered the story from Bengal to Burma, Thailand, and Laos. Now, Vietnam and Cambodia obtained their stories partly from Java and partly from India via the eastern routes. Now, there is also a great concern when this retelling or this criticism on Doordarshan's Ramayana was telecast. I quote from the book: "The televised Ramayana did, however, disturb some observers who worried that the Doordarshan version might come to dominate other tellings of the story." Romila Thapar, a noted scholar of Indian history, is among such observers. "When the state acts as patron of the arts," she quotes, argues Thapar, "it often favors social groups that wield relatively great influence in the society." In Thapar's analysis, Doordarshan presented a Ramayana telling that reflected the concerns not of the vast majority of Indians, but of what she calls the middle class and other aspirants to the same status. Now, as you can see, there are quite a few concerns with the choice of words in this small excerpt from the book. But if you read the book, you will understand that their understanding of India is kind of fractured in its own sense. They think that the Doordarshan's version of the Ramayana is what got the story of Ramayana to every household in India. Well, that seems a little funny to me because Ramayana, I believe, was a story and is a story that remains to be in the very epicenter of every household. Whether we believe in the whole concept of Rama, Lakshmana, or other characters or not, this the knowledge of the story is very, very existent in every household of ours. Now, to think that Doordarshan kind of fractured the thought of Ramayana and influenced people to only believe that there was one kind of Ramayana is something that we could deliberate upon a little bit more. Now, this tonality that they take was a little surprising to me. Was it a lack of knowledge that India was wider or more open than they thought it was, or was it just a reflection of that time when there was no internet or no Google to kind of propagate a lot of theories? But when we do say this, I must take you to Srimati Rukmini Devi's vision of the Ramayana in a little while. But as we see, this book has selective emphasis and it also has selective omissions. While claiming to celebrate multiplicity, the book Many Rāmāyaṇas disproportionately foregrounds dissenting and subversive versions. Example, A.K. Ramanuja's 300 Rāmāyaṇas, I'm sorry, the Jain and the Tamil folk variants, often sidelining the Bhakti core that defines the majority of the living traditions. This emphasis misleads readers, especially those uninitiated into Indic knowledge, into seeing the original Valmiki Ramayana as just one among many, rather than the tradition's seed text and referential anchor. It opens with A.K. Ramanuja's influential essay, 300 Ramayanas, which brilliantly maps the textual diversity of the epic tradition, but subtly frames the tradition as inherently fractured and relativist. Subsequent chapters focus on Jain rejections of Rama as divine, Tamil folk retellings that parody key episodes, and even renditions where Rama and Ravana's moral roles are reversed. These are valuable cultural artifacts, no doubt, but they are presented without counterbalance from the devotional or Shastric interpretations that view the Ramayana as a text of spiritual guidance, metaphysics, and even transcendental love. So the question arises, if a book foregrounds versions that question or ridicule the tradition with neglecting those that venerate and embody it, is it truly representing multiplicity, or is it curating a particular ideological lens? This is something that we could think about the book. Now, there's also great disregard for the living traditions. The book discusses living traditions as an object of observation rather than from the inside out. But can one truly speak of a living tradition without having lived it? Now, as a Bharatanatyam dancer, I can say with confidence that portraying a character is not a casual artistic act. Yes, it is a thought process of patra pravesham which can be taught, but the entry into a role so completely that your own ego dissolves. This is not a metaphor. It is an attempt. It is attempted to achieve through years of rigorous sadhana involving the body, the breath, voice, mind, and even silence. I believe in the classical Indic arts, this isn't simply method acting. It is an act of bhakti, a surrender to the character as a deva or a symbol of cosmic force or whatever you would want to call it. Without this surrender to the art and to the character to be played, the portrayal will lack soul. And this is the key difference between a good performer and an exceptional artist. And this surrender gives rise to rasa, the distilled aesthetic essence that is neither purely intellectual, intentional, and not merely emotional, but is completely transformational. This is why the living tradition of Indian art forms can never be reduced to the political allegory or postmodern parody. It is lived in temples, in homes, on stages, and even in the inner selves of some. The Many Rāmāyaṇas anthology, for all its scholarly insight, does not reflect this embodied interiority. And perhaps it cannot, because such understanding cannot arise from textual analysis alone, but can arise only from experience. So we must also ask, if we wish to understand how the Ramayanas live today, should we not observe and listen closely to those who live it? One such person is Srimati Rukmini Devi. Her vision of the Ramayana, as a student of the arts, I cannot but help draw comparisons to her envisionment of Ramayana. Srimati Rukmini Devi, for those of you who may not know of her, was a pioneer of Bharatanatyam revival. She reimagined temple dance as a stagecraft without losing its spiritual essence. She founded Kalakshetra in 1936 to preserve India's cultural and ethical traditions. And one of her core works was the Ramayana dance drama. She created a 6-part Ramayana from a combination of Valmiki, Kamban, and other influences of Ramayana traditions. She presented she presented the epic not as a myth, but as living philosophy through Bharatanatyam music and stagecraft as coded in the Bharata's Natya Shastra. There is aesthetic and devotional fusion, emphasizing on rasa or the aesthetic immersion and bhakti, a devotional surrender. Dancers become mere vessels of the character, not interpreters, but participants in the epic while we enact that character. Her legacy is that she reclaimed performances as a living tradition and a form of cultural archiving with great aestheticism. Srimati Rukmini Devi, as you can see in this slide, notes in the early 1970s, in 1971 to be particular, well before Many Rāmāyaṇas was conceived, she penned an article about her experience at the International Ramayana Festival in East Java that she attended. For reasons of time, I cannot be reading the full piece here, but it is freely available for those interested on archive.org. I urge you to implore it. The article offers a rare and illuminating glimpse into the reflections of a woman deeply inspired and immersed in Indian aesthetics, witnessing firsthand the breathtaking scope of India's cultural imprint in Southeast Asia. What strikes me is her profound sense of mutual respect for every tradition of Ramayana, not merely diversity for diversity's sake, but a shared reverence for the epic's many tellings. It also points to something very important, that awareness of these Ramayana traditions and their interdependencies was very much alive and accessible even in the pre internet era. Now, I must wonder, when Paula Richman suggests that the multiplicity of Ramayanas was somehow unknown or under acknowledged in India, what are we to make of that? Were there not scholars, dancers, poets, and historians who are the living repositories of these memories who could have been consulted? Why does this assumption persist that that people might be unaware of their own cultural inheritance? And more importantly, what does that assumption reveal about the gaze of the one who makes this assumption? This reading has reminded me of how cautious we must be when Indian concepts are interpreted through foreign eyes. Yes, we must remain empathetic, recognizing that such scholars may not share the foundational sensibilities we inherit simply by growing up in India, but empathy should not come at the cost of our clarity. We must equally firm in asserting that we are best positioned to interpret what is born of our land, for we are nurtured by its rhythms, by its language, and even by its silence. What truly animates Indian texts is not merely their content, but their essence. The spirit infused through generations of oral transmissions, embodied performances, and lived philosophy. Without that essence, these works risk becoming extremely flat, academic, and sometimes even sterile. This is not a dismissal of anybody or a personal take on anybody, but a call to dialogue rooted in mutual respect. The world has only just begun to discover the inner pulse of India, the very essence of our Shruti that gave our seers who listened, deliberated, and distilled in profound truths. Ours is a civilization not merely of monuments and manuscripts, but of living thought which was translated into traditions. A civilization that must not be studied but savored. Now, this draws us to the core question that arose when I read the book. Does bhakti have a place? As someone who embodies the Ramayana through dance, I cannot but help ask, where is bhakti in many Ramayanas? Bhakti is not an afterthought. It is the very pulse of how this epic lives in the breath and the hearts of millions of people across the globe. Yet, in this anthology, devotional interpretations are barely visible. This raises an important question. Why is the devotional often treated as less intellectual or valuable than the folklore or political? Can we truly engage with Ramayana, not just study it, without delving into the concept of bhakti? I believe any honest reading must account for its sacred dimension as well, without which we risk hollowing out that tradition we claim to explore. Much of the scholarship in many Ramayanas is filtered through sociological, anthropological, or even political frameworks. While they are all useful in their own accord, these frameworks often flatten the aesthetic experience that is central to Indic art and storytelling. Now, the Bhakti offers it offers a radically different epistemology, one that is rooted in the lived performative experience rather than distanced critiquing. Now, to understand bhakti is to also truly grasp what the Ramayana means to those who live it. We must understand bhakti not merely as sentimental devotion, but as a philosophical, aesthetic, and embodied pathway. Bhakti can be emotional devotion or loving devotion as we all know it. Bhakti can be sharanagati, a sense of surrender to the work you do, to the people you live with, to a thought process. Bhakti can be a philosophical thought as Jnanottara Bhakti. Bhakti can be an aesthetic emotion or rasa as believed in the Natya or Bhava Bhakti. Bhakti can just be a way of life as embodied in the folk and ritual context. Now, when we look at bhakti only as the devotion to a supreme, then it may or may not sit well with many. But bhakti is a concept that we can incorporate and do incorporate in many ways in our life. It's just a choice of how we want to interpret bhakti. Now, can you imagine Ramayana not being emotionally intriguing when our grandparents told us about the story and how they explained it? I cannot but imagine how it is possible to imagine Ramayana without the core essence of rasa and bhakti in it. To conclude, there can be some alterations in the way we think and the way we approach an Indian tradition when academically approaching it. Centering essence, centering experience, and centering embodied knowing must come back to work, going beyond textualism. Now, Indian traditions are not only spiritual but experiential in their nature. It is rooted in ritual performance, oral memory, and lived practice. And texts are not one layer of multi-dimensional cultural reality. Now, it must also be recorded from the observer to the participant. Academic detachment often overlooks the inner life of Indian traditions. To truly understand, one must not merely analyze, but immerse themselves to see from within, not just look from the outside. We must also be very conscious about decolonizing the lens with which we view these Indian traditions. Interpretations shaped by Euro American frameworks risk flattening the vibrancy of Indic knowledge systems. We must question ourselves and others. Whose category are we using? Whose authority is being centered when we form opinions? Restoring embodied authority is a must. Dancers, musicians, ritualists, and storytellers are not informants, they are knowledge bearers. Their authority must be acknowledged within academia, not just as exotic subjects, but as co creators of this knowledge tradition. The essence before analysis must bring importance. In India, meaning is not just constructed, it is received through Shraddha, reverence, Rasa, through the aesthetic feeling, and Anubhava, the direct experience. Academic study must engage with these subtle and sacred dimensions. To conclude, I will say that the impulse to recognize multiple Ramayanas is a great thought. Our tradition is richly plural, layered, and hospitable to regional, linguistic, and theological variations. But plurality must not become an excuse for rootlessness. If we are truly understanding of the diversity of the Ramayana tradition, we must first understand its depth. The depth begins with Valmiki, whose Ramayana is not just a story, but a vision of dharma, aesthetics, and metaphysics. It extends to Kamban, whose Tamil retellings infuses bhakti and poetic intensity. These are not just two versions among many. These are the axial texts around which the others kind of orbit. Moreover, our interpretive framework must draw from within the tradition, from the rasa theory, which reveals the emotional and spiritual dimensions, from dhvani, the principle of poetic suggestions, and from adhyatma, the inner meaning of the epic. Without these, we risk mistaking the depth for mere multiplicity. Crucially, we must widen the circle of authority. Today's academic spaces are too often dominated by sociologists and philologists. But what of the dancer who embodies Sita through Abhinaya? What of the folk bard who sings the Ramcharitmanas from memory? The temple priest who enacts Rama's coronation in ritual? Or the grandmother whose lullaby carries Rama's name so lovingly? These are not passive carriers of culture, they are interpreters, transmitters, and the key custodians of this very culture. So let us imagine a future where the study of the Ramayana invites not only critique but participation as well, where scholarly discourses honors both plurality and rootedness, and where epistemology is not only textual but embodied, not only analytical but devotional as well. Because Ramayana, at its heart, is not just a text, it is a tradition. And traditions live not in the libraries alone, but in the breath, in the voice, in the rhythm, and even in the silence. Namaskaram.
Wow, what a wonderful presentation, review of the book, Many Rāmāyaṇas. Aryamba ji, actually, this was above my expectation when I asked you to review a book, and when you were choosing among books, finally you arrived at this book called Many Rāmāyaṇas. You argued very well the epistemological sources and the ideological positions of the editorial team, the publishers, the authors inside the book, how and from where they are coming from. That was, and finally, your conclusion also, your argument, the final argument that I was making this argument a few years ago that these authors have to be very careful while dealing with living traditions. They are getting surprised, and they once one of these authors said also that while Greeks are not responding negatively to their analysis, while Chinese are not responding to their analysis of the classical epics of their tradition, only Indians are responding negatively to their Indological studies is their worry. I told them that when these are living traditions, when these classical epics are living traditions, they have to be very careful. They have to be culturally sensitive. They have to remember that the cultural insider would respond from the living tradition in a different way than in the cultures where these classical epics or have no longer a living tradition. So, if you are talking of some classical Greek epic or classical Greek drama and making some negative comments about the culture in which those epics lived, those people whose culture it was are no longer living, so they may not respond. Or those who are considered to be the inheritors of that culture are no longer subscribing to that culture because they have all got converted into Christianity. If it is in Greece or Italy, if it is in China, they all got into communism. But in India, it's not happening. That is why you are receiving the backlash. I had to tell them. So, and you argued very well for why the edited book, Many Rāmāyaṇas, cannot be received in a very friendly way by the living tradition of Rāmāyanas in India. You have a lot to contribute. That's all that I can say. And let me check if there are any.
It's Pranshu here. So, Aryamba ji, what did you think about the Meghnadvad Kavya article in this book?
That is something that we could discuss in detail about. But one thing that is common in the thread of essays that is visible in the book is that they hold themselves from a point where they don't want to go into the tradition beyond a point.
Yep.
They don't want to get to the epicenter of the
Yep.
tradition, but they want to comment on the tradition, which is absolutely valid and necessary for us to gain an academic view of our own traditions. And it is important for us to critique our tradition so that we learn and we discover new layers of it, new understandings of it, new answers to it. But at the same time, we must all, as academicians, we must also allow ourselves and we must be brave enough to delve into the very truth of the tradition and and have an understanding which is encompassive. You cannot be choosing what you would like to believe when it comes to tradition, because tradition is tradition, and whether we like certain aspects of it or not, it is valid and it is existent. So the acknowledgement of that existence is kind of the main lacking of the book, I thought.
There
And
are
w-
three
and
responses from one Archana Shivasubramanian. They are all long responses. Each one is very long. Aryamba, I really appreciate, resonate with how you frame the idea of surrender, which is an aesthetic by itself. But I am also wondering, can surrender take only one form? Isn't it possible also that what feels like intellectual critique to one person may be another's way of wrestling with the text? And when so many versions of the Ramayana exist across caste, religion, language, can we really say that the spiritual essence lies only in Valmiki's telling? Couldn't the plurality itself be the tradition's deeper truth? One more question. Speaking of the foreign eye, if someone born in Odisha reads the Ramayana differently than someone from Tamil Nadu or the US, are they all outsiders to each other? Or could it be that tradition stays pure and interpretation and argumentation, even from the outside, is part of how a tradition stays alive? For example, a scholar like David Shulman, a non-Indian scholar who has spent decades immersed in Telugu, Tamil, Sanskrit traditions, translating Bhakti poetry with deep sensitivity. His scholarly work on South Indian Bhakti is unparalleled. Is his reading foreign? Because all these are addressed to you, Aryambaji. If you want to respond, you please respond. Otherwise, I am tempted to respond to Archana Shivasubramanian.
I'd just like to say that Madhu, I'll just answer very quickly. So, for the first thing that she points out, can surrender take only one form? Absolutely not. Surrender in any sense, like I mentioned, if it is surrender to the work you do, surrender to an intellectual thought you hold or nourish in your head, surrender to a person, surrender to an ideology, surrender to an idol, any kind of surrender is surrender. But the question of the book is that it does not really seem like a wrestling with Ramayana as much as it seems like a very convenient choice of takings from the tradition of Ramayanas. So it is an excessively academic book and extremely valuable for anybody who wants to know about the vast traditions of Ramayana. It not only talks about the existence of different Ramayanas, but also goes in great detail into the differences, into the similarities of many stories and episodes of the Ramayana through these many lived traditions. But the question arises when there is a layer of a tradition, for example, a thought process layer, which is absolutely ignored, then is it a foreign thought, or is it uh, telling of the author that they are actually delving into the tradition when they don't chance upon one side of the tradition? Now, it is great to only acknowledge the academic scholarship of the book, but it is something else to call it, um, uh, because the book is titled that it is a compendium of living traditions. I am tempted to put forth this argument: where is the living tradition? Because the book talks about a great deal of academic thought prowess, but there is no voice of a traditional practitioner, or there is no voice that they have documented of a traditional practitioner in the book. Therefore, does translating a language only is that the uh, only way that we can uh, title a scholar uh, like Sir David Schulman, who is whose thought I have also admired and I also read in great detail. But I am forced to ask this question, that when he ignores the existence of bhakti, when he ignores one whole concept, it's not just bhakti, but when they ignore one whole layer of the tradition, then is this a intellectual um, uh, is this a choice that they make knowingly, or is this something that is coming out of their understanding or the lack of it from how they understand our tradition? So the to answer the questions, I will just have to put another question forward. When we talk of Indian tradition, what is it that we actually are talking about? Now, if we can answer this question, I think we have the answer to all the questions that is posted, because what we understand Indian tradition to be and Indian culture to be is how we will reflect upon this book as well. So to each their own, but as a practitioner and as somebody who knows that living traditions cannot be so academic in nature, because um, don't get me wrong. That's when I say it cannot be academic in nature, I mean that it cannot be so external in nature. You have to internalize it. You have to get to a point where your ego is absolutely demolished. Otherwise, you cannot portray a character. You cannot live the life of Rama as Rama. So, when such surrender is needed in Indian art and thought processes, where is that whole layer of surrender in this version or in these tellings of the Ramayana will be a question.
Okay, good. Archana Shivasubramanian ji has come back saying, that answers my question, which is quite possibly a general critique around postmodernism itself. Within postmodernism, the literary criticism side from Jacques Derrida, that is what brings this multiple meanings and multiple possibilities, and meaning of a text being a product of interaction between the text and the audience. And I think that is from where Archana Subramanian ji is coming. And but a few clarifications are needed here. Foreign, the word foreign that is used in her response seems to be coming from the idea that there are some foreigners coming from some foreign countries than India. In cultural studies, in the study of any culture, a foreigner is someone who is not culturally sensitive, culturally relativistic, who is not sensitive to the culture insiders' understanding. So there can be an Indian foreigner to Ramayana, but a foreigner who is Indian to Ramayana. If a foreigner has a person who is a foreigner by his geographical location or by his descent in a country, but if he is sympathetic, if he is culturally sensitive to the insider's perspective, his perspective is not considered to be foreign. He is admired for trying to get into the emic understanding, insider's understanding of the culture. And if an Indian, even if he is an Indian, like we saw in the book review by Deepak MRG in the evening, in the afternoon, even an Indian author in his book Many Rāmāyaṇas, Many Lessons, has a foreign view, foreign in the sense, a perspective which is not empathetic or sympathetic to the cultural insider. It does not have a cultural relativist perspective of the culture, of the tradition. So foreigner, not in the sense of a geographical foreigner or foreigner living in a foreign country. So the foreign view for any culture study, for the study of any culture, is an outsider view which is not culturally sensitive, culturally relativistic to the insider's view of the tradition bearer. I think that is the same point that Aryamba ji was also making throughout her presentation. Thank you, Archana ji, for being present till late in the evening for this talk and for paying such a keen attention and paying your responding, caring to respond to the talk. And I'm able to see wonderful people like Satyanand Kitchen Swami is also there, Shobha Narayan ji is also there, and very well read scholars are in the audience, though by this time of any academic discussion, the audience come to a very low number, but even the small number has all wonderful, great people. Thank you very much for all of you for being present in this last part of this symposium. With this, we come to the end of this symposium. And Deepak MRG is thanking Indic for organizing this symposium. We organize these symposiums under the guidance of our founder, Harikiran Vadlamani Garu, who is incessantly creative and comes up with newer and newer topics. For example, it is he who came up with the topic for the next symposium, which is going to be on the 22nd of June. The topic is New Age Spirituality, which includes concepts like mindfulness, gratefulness, stoicism, and all the New Age spiritual concepts and Vedic roots of these concepts. Earlier, actually, our conference symposium series started with our seminar in the IGNCA campus in Delhi on the Vedic mindfulness, Vedic roots of mindfulness or Vedic mindfulness. So the same topic is going to get repeated in the coming symposium also on the 22nd June. Mindfulness is also going to be covered. So those who have not contributed earlier in our Vedic mindfulness seminar also can come and contribute to the next symposium on all the concepts, including mindfulness, but on mindfulness also we are going to cover. Gratefulness is another concept. Stoicism is another concept. We have made a list of 7 such topics, 7 such concepts, which are which have become very important in the contemporary New Age spiritual thinkings, New Age spiritual thought. And the symposium is going to cover Vedic roots of all these New Age spirituality concepts like mindfulness, gratefulness, stoicism, etc. Okay. With that, let us conclude this symposium with Shanti Mantra. Sahana bhavatu sahanau bhunaktu saha viryam karavavahai tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.